Thank you very much, Maria. And to Brookings for, well, for first of all, for giving me, and I suspect many of you, a great alternative to our Monday morning staff meetings, but also for convening a really important discussion that brings together two different sets of actors that don't normally gather in the same room. You know, on the one hand, you have trade policy experts, and we have our own set of acronyms and lexicon, as Ambassador Marantis said, biennial ministerials and things like that. And then you have internet governance and cybersecurity and privacy professionals who have their own lexicon and decamp to Geneva or Rio or Dubai for 2 to 3 weeks out of the year and come up with and have their own meetings. But what it does is it permits us to have a wide-ranging discussion this morning that reflects the broad set of issues that are covered in the U.S. Japan dialogue on the internet economy. And this morning we've got a great set of panelists, a highly respected group of panelists, to talk through the bilateral relationship and efforts to promote an open global digital economy. So I'm going to introduce the speakers in order and ask them to come up and say a couple of words, and then we'll all sit down and have a discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Ed Gresser, who as of March 9th has returned to the Office of the United States Trade Representative as Director of Policy Planning. This is Ed's third stint at USTR. He had previously been a scholar in residence and a policy advisor a while back to Ambassador Charlene Barshevsky. Before taking his current job, Ed was the director of the think tank Progressive Economy, and he earlier directed the Trade and Global Markets Project for the Democratic Leadership Council and Progressive Policy Institute. He's also been a legislative aide for Senator Baucus, and is just one of the most thoughtful scholars and practitioners in trade policy that we know, particularly on issues related to the digital economy and development. And so, Ed, could you come up here and maybe talk a little bit about how trade negotiators are seeking to codify rules, particularly in the TPP and TTIP, and how are the U.S. and Japan cooperating on these issues?
Thank you very much, Jake, and thank you, Maria, for inviting me and keeping me on the panel in this kind of new role. As Jake mentioned, I'm quite new to the agency. I think what I would like to do, getting to the point about the codification of rules, but first pull back a bit and discuss a bit, what can we see happening in the digital world? What can we see happening in digital trade? Why is this a focus of the U.S. government and of the U.S. Trade Representative, Ambassador Froman? And I think to do that, one interesting way is to pull back. Jake mentioned that I'd started my work in trade policy with Senator Baucus. That was, I look back, and I don't feel all that old and decrepit, but my career is a bit older than the internet. I started working for Senator Baucus in February of 1993, and the internet, as more or less as we know it in the form of the World Wide Web, went live on April 30th, 1993. So when I started my work in this field, there was no concept of electronic commerce or digital trade, all those sorts of things. So they're quite new topics. So when the World Wide Web went live, there were about 10 million users of computer networks in the country, or in the world. By the time the Clinton administration came to an end in 2000, there were 360 million, mostly in the United States and Europe and Japan. Now there are 3 billion internet users. So a gigantic expansion of the digital world. And in fact, just since 2009, when President Obama took office, it's doubled from 1.5 billion to 3. In these past 6 years also, the world's fiber optic cable network has doubled in mileage, and flows of data around the world have grown from about 15 exabytes per month to about 60 exabytes per month. So what you're seeing around us, and not apart from the world of policy, but not directly attached to it, is a gigantic and rapid expansion of the digital world, of the number of people who are using the internet, of the number of businesses who are connected to it, of the number of scholars and universities, and of the production of information and its traveling around the world. What does this mean for trade? In a way, with the rules and with the policies relatively undeveloped, you could make an analogy to a kind of discovery of the sea for tangible physical goods. That there is a new medium for conveying high-value things at much lower cost and much greater speed than ever before. you can imagine, and Demetrios pointed this out very well, a tremendous amount of new opportunities for small businesses. Small businesses, there are many who export, but it was a relatively small share of trade. The reason for that is that they don't have much time to travel about the world and figure out how to fill out forms. The access to the internet, ability to transmit data, ability to bring data back, it really makes it a different world for them. You can see, imagine in the future, very large new exporters, non-traditional types of things like universities or hospitals providing telemedicine around the world. You can see, and then finally, give me one more statistical point. Cisco's Internet of Everything, this is a projection of the value of all this to the world, suggests that over the next 10 decades, $19 trillion in new value, new output. That is a figure more or less equal to the whole GDP of the United States, or to probably 4 years of global economic growth. So it's quite consequential. Then if you can look back at the United States, there's a very interesting, very valuable ITC report that was done a few months ago called Digital Trade 2. And this looks at the impact of growing internet use from 2006 to 2012. In practical terms, over those years, U.S. internet use rose from 69% of the public to 79%. The ITC concludes that because of this growth, which is not tremendous, U.S. GDP in 2012 was likely $517 to $711 billion higher than it would otherwise have been. That real wages in the country were 4.5 to 5% higher. And this is a kind of interesting point, given some of the criticism of the internet as not being a large employer. Unemployment in the U.S., because of the falling cost of job search, was about 0.3% lower than it would otherwise have been. So that year was like 7.9%. So they were thinking instead of 8.2, it had fallen to 7.9. And in practical terms, this means about 450,000 men and women on the job and working when they would otherwise have been at home. What then are the challenges? All this future depends on a single open internet. We can already see in the ITC report the cost of some barriers to trade, and we can see some larger, more ominous systemic challenges, in particular, arbitrary limits to data flow and forced localization of data in servers. These are sort of the central issues that USTR has been working on, beginning back in around 2010 with the articulation of ICT principles, first with the EU, then with Japan, Mauritius, Taiwan, and Jordan. These set out the idea that trade agreements should prevent restrictions on cross-border data flows across industries, and that as a corollary, local storage or processing requirements should also be avoided. TPP with TTIP and TISA is a unique opportunity to bring these concepts into policy on a very large scale. I would say Japan is a very important partner here, and echo Demetrios' comments. After Japan has joined the TPP, they've proven themselves one of the most helpful voices in the negotiations in this area, and success in the digital trade provisions of TPP at the end will very significantly reflect Japan's contributions. They've also made innovative contributions of their own that USTR supported. The two key principles on free data flow and limits on forced localization were introduced as binding rules in TPP. A consensus among TPP partners on the value of such commitments has now emerged, and we're well on our way to finalizing it as part of the TPP. In all these instances, I'd like to mention two things before we close. A key challenge has been to convince trading partners that these new rules, which protect the flows of data that are the key to the Internet's growth, are not going to undermine important governmental and societal goals. Chief among these has been the protection of privacy. We've approached such concerns the way we approach regulation generally. Trade rules recognize the right to regulate and are not a means of interfering with sovereign decisions on matters that may reflect values that differ from country to country. We are proud supporters of robust privacy protections and strongly believe they're fully consistent with expansive cross-border transfers. At the same time, we believe in the value of the open internet, of data flow, and of digital commerce. Trade rules are a means of ensuring that the implementation of domestic rules, including with respect to privacy, do not unduly restrict trade. This is reflected in WTO and FTA general exceptions, which give latitude for regulation, but also impose reasonable constraints, that regulation not serve as a means of unjustified discrimination or a disguised restriction on trade, and be necessary to achieve the stated objective. For the first time also, in any trade agreement, we're asking our trading partners to secure robust balance in their copyright systems, an unprecedented move that draws directly on U.S. copyright exceptions and limitations, including fair use for important purposes such as scholarship, criticism, news commentary, teaching, and research. The balance we're seeking also includes that safe harbors for Internet service providers, or ISPs, are available, so legitimate providers of cloud computing, user-generated content sites, and a host of other Internet-related services who act responsibly online can thrive. Our touchstone in TPP is the strong and balanced domestic legal framework we have. Fundamentally, the hope of TPP is to be a milestone in the work to preserve the single global Internet that we've inherited from the last few decades in an atmosphere where its use is broadening, it's becoming one of the main vehicles of transmission for commerce, and when its future can bring so much benefit to individuals, to families as consumers and worldwide shoppers, to businesses as exporters, and to all of us. Fundamentally, the heart of the work on TPP is a hope to ensure freedom of the Internet, the open digital economy, and the preservation of the single open Internet as a common good for the world's people. My thanks to Brookings for inviting me to participate, and hope to take your questions in a moment.
Thank you, Ed. And I think it's important to remember that you want not just an open Internet, but an open, secure, and reliable Internet. And so as you look at what the trade agreements do or have the potential to do, as Ed pointed out, it's not just about guaranteeing data flows. It's about protecting trade secrets and making sure that intermediaries are appropriately protected. And so with that, I want to turn to Motohiro Tsuchiya. And Professor Tsuchiya is a professor with the Graduate School of Media and Governance at Keio University. He focuses on the impact of the information revolution on international relations, regulations regarding telecommunications and the Internet, and cybersecurity. He's the author of several books, but he has a new book coming out shortly on cybersecurity and international relations. He was a visiting scholar at the East-West Center from March 2014 to February 2015. And we're very pleased to have him here from Japan. He's just off of the plane as of last night, and so glad this is in the morning, not in the afternoon. But look forward to hearing what you have to say. I wonder if we could take advantage of your expertise in cybersecurity and Internet governance. So now how can we ensure an open, reliable, and secure digital economy while addressing legitimate cybersecurity concerns? And how should or how are the U.S. and Japan cooperating bilaterally in Internet governance and or trade forums? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Motohiro Tsuchiya from Keio University, Japan. I'm very happy to be back to Washington, D.C. I spent 1 year in 2001, 2002 in Washington, D.C. area. So I was a visiting scholar at the University of Maryland and George Washington University. It was a time of 9/11, so it was a hard time for a foreigner to live here, but it was exciting for me. So because I realized the importance of cybersecurity by the incident. So I switched my research topic from Internet governance or digital divide to cybersecurity, cyber incident issues. But thank you for taking up this cyber issue in the context of Japan-U.S. relationship. Actually, Prime Minister will come to Washington quite soon, and so I'm not sure, so he will talk about cyber issue, but so this is also an important topic to be discussed between Japan and the United States. So I believe you cannot undergo my rough English, so I have some slides for you. And I will talk about China, but I'm not blaming China. So China is notorious, but I have some friends with Chinese institutes, so they are struggling. So they are notorious for being the origin of cyber attacks, but they are still struggling too. So we want to fix those problems with the alliance between Japan and the United States. So many people mentioned about this incident. So Chinese government is now drafting a counter-terror law. And this law mandates Chinese financial companies to use domestic encryption software to track financial activities in China. So even foreign companies operating in China has to use Chinese encryption software to protect their transactions. And Chinese government is demanding set up backdoors for the Chinese government. And you have, so if you are from the Microsoft, Google, or other American or Japanese companies, so you have to submit source codes of your software. So this is a big intellectual property or trade issues for foreign companies. Of course, domestic Chinese companies too. So, but these things is happening in many times in Chinese history. So, in year 2000, I bought this box of the operating software called Red Flag. So it's one version of Linux. So China wants to develop their own operating system. They didn't like Apple OS. They didn't like Microsoft or Windows. So they wanted to develop their own software to secure Chinese transaction, Chinese people's communication. And in 2009, so China compulsory certificate was notorious. So the Chinese government wanted the same things as today. So they wanted to mandate foreign companies to use Chinese software or disclose source codes of the software used in China. So U.S. government, Japanese government said, no, this is not a good idea, so please stop. And Chinese government stopped it. But actually, so again, the Chinese government is trying to introduce this measure in quite a near future. So, but foreign companies trying to set software as a black boxes. So they want to protect their intellectual properties. But why so Chinese government need to look inside of black boxes? So they're worrying about the inside of the black boxes. So especially after Snowden revelation. So Snowden says so the U.S. government has a deep hands in the, into the Chinese networks. And maybe so American companies might have backdoors for the Chinese, U.S. government or something like that. So they are very paranoid about software now. And June 2013, President Obama and President Xi met in California to talk about, try to fix the cyber issues, cyber attacks, but they couldn't agree. But why? I believe that President Xi couldn't promise any workable promise. So because Chinese domestic cybersecurity is very, very serious these days. So this is a picture of the ant people. So it's a strange world. But very young people who graduated Chinese university are sharing this tiny room because they couldn't find any jobs. And there are another people called rats, so rat people. So they are living underground. They are sharing very tiny, wet, very bad condition room to share because they don't have jobs. So these kinds of, so you see some laptop computers in their rooms. So they are still stick to the information technology, digital technology. The internet is changing Chinese society, actually. So they want to find a job. They want to have a very good life, but they cannot. So they are angry young men, angry young people, and they could be a possible cyber fighters. So that's a problem. So this is a domestic problem in China. President Xi is trying to fix this problem, but he cannot. So the one solution is that anti-corruption activity. So the President Xi is trying to fix corruption issues in China. But so this is for good for young people. So young people are supporting President Xi so far. But I don't know what will happen. So what the Chinese government is doing now is that control companies instead of people. So young people are not controllable anymore in Chinese society. So that's why Chinese government is trying to regulate companies, domestic companies, foreign companies. So that's easier for them to control the internet. But what's happening in Japan? So we are getting a lot of cyber attacks in these days. More than 5 million malicious events found in government monitors only in 2013. And more than 150 incidents were reported in critical infrastructures in Japan. So we are in a very serious condition these days. That's why the Abe administration published a cybersecurity strategy in 2013. I was a member of the government council, so I was sitting on the other side of the table, but no one is interested in me, so I have no picture. I helped the drafting of this strategy. And last year, the National Diet passed the Cybersecurity Basic Act. What means Basic Act? So Basic Act is a mid-term or long-term goal is set. So this is a very important step for us to pass this legislation. And we are making a lot of international collaboration between U.S. government and other European and Asian governments. So we started this dialogue between Japan and the United States. And so 2+2 ministerial meeting was held many times, and they discussed the cyber issues too. So we have many projects between the both governments, active practice, UNGGE, or other things. So active is coordinating operations with FBI, and practice is working for the U.S. Predict project. So we are making a good collaboration these days. And another big partner for Japan is ASEAN. So we are regular meetings with ASEAN governments, ASEAN countries. And one of the example of the collaboration between ASEAN is Daedalus. This is a monitoring system of darknets. Darknets is not network IP addresses not used actually, but they are receiving a lot of malicious accesses from foreign countries. So we are sharing this kind of information and intelligence with ASEAN countries. This is an example of Indonesia. So international alliance is very important to protect us and against cyber threats. And we have to strengthen our activities between Japan and the United States. And free flow of information is very important, but we should not let China expose their angers to fix their problems. So we have to stop their cyber attacks. So we have to help them fix their problems by international alliance. So it's easy to blame China or other countries for cyber attacks, but we have to look at the root of the true problem. We have to help them to fix the problems. So as Jason said, I was visiting scholar at East-West Center last year. I spent 1 year in Hawaii. It was very nice year for me and my family. But I was reading the history of the Japan-U.S. relations. So we were very tragic history. So we had many communication or perception gaps. So we are still not perfect. We will sometimes misunderstand each other. Maybe we might be misunderstanding China or other countries. We have to make a very good alliance to fix cyber issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tsuchiya. For that wonderful presentation, which was also a great example of fair use, I think, given all those headlines that were up there. So that was perfect. I now want to introduce Jim Foster, who's going to, I think, probably pick up where he left off. Professor Foster is a professor at Keio University and directs the Keio International Center for the Internet and Society. He has a long and distinguished career in the U.S. Foreign Service. He worked for 11 years at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, including as economic counselor and minister for political affairs, and he's also DCM, Deputy Chief of Mission, to the U.S. mission to the European Union in Brussels. After the Foreign Service, he joined Microsoft as Director for Corporate and Regulatory Affairs in Tokyo, and he helped lead the launch of the U.S. Japan Internet Economy Dialogue. So Jim, Asia is emerging as the new center of the global internet economy. U.S. Japan cooperation is increasingly important. Could you talk about how the U.S. and Japan can align better in the future in areas like cybersecurity standards, privacy policies, trade agreements, to ensure a more open internet for the region?
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I'm just delighted to be with you here today. I'm going to do a little bit of level setting. I think you even saw my first slide. What is the internet? My goodness, is he going to start with that? But you know, I think just to get into the conversation, and then I will get into some specifics. I'm afraid I'm going to annoy some people in the audience here, perhaps with some of the things I may have to say towards the end. But then I assume we're going to have a vibrant question and answer period. Okay, so what is the internet? You know, everybody thinks they know it because you use it every day, but let's just a few words to keep in mind. It's a global technology without borders. It's a distributed, resilient network. It operates at scale. It's ubiquitous. And yet it's threatened, as my colleague was saying, by threats of cyber sovereignty and, frankly, dangers of ethnic, linguistic, and economic fragmentation. We may look at these 20, 25 years we've had of a global internet as kind of being an interesting interlude, but certainly not an integral part of the future of the internet. What is the internet economy? And you know, I think again we dance around that a little bit, but it's everything from email to social media to e-commerce to big data, Internet of Things, really new business models. The way we consume books, the way we watch television, the way we listen to music, the way increasingly we're getting our health care, education is changing dramatically. Even taxis. I mean, my goodness, what would we do without Uber? And that has created a new economy, but also a whole new set of new issues. There's privacy, and you know, that's about protecting and sharing data. That's a new sort of concept. Cybersecurity. We have infrastructure, but we also have surveillance. Content online, new, very destructive business models. I mean, the book, the music, motion picture industry are fundamentally going to change. Newspapers, I mean, how many of you read a print newspaper today? Probably a lot of you. I get my Washington Post, however, online because I live in Japan, and it's great. Net neutrality. You know, at one sense, it's about competition, but it's also about capacity building. And I'll have something to say that may get people a little annoyed here about that. Competition, the problem of scale. And when you got big boys around the world operating globally, what happens to the local guys that want to get started? We talk about small business, but small business finds it hard to get a start in the global internet. And then standards and interoperability. This is really at the nub of some of the things we're going to talk about today. A global internet, but you know, we also live in communities. And those communities in many ways have different standards, values, expectations. How are they protected, and how do you link them up together with what the global internet is all about? Okay, so Japan and the U.S. were really pioneers on the internet. We were the guys, you know, that invented it, but Japan was really the first country in Asia to deploy at scale. And we brought the internet together to Asia. I always say, and very proudly, that Keio University was at the forefront of that. We actually plugged Japan into the internet and, frankly, played a huge role in building the internet out in Asia. But you know, increasingly, Japan is on the sidelines here. I mean, the weight is clearly shifting to China and India. By 2025, 80%. 2025, 10 years from now, 80% of the users will be in Africa and Asia. It'll be a very different internet. What we say and what we think about the internet will be less relevant because, as we used to tell everyone, hey, it's all about scale. And the bulk of the subscribers, the bulk of the businesses are in the United States and Europe. Therefore, we are going to be at the forefront of setting standards and expectations. argument doesn't carry so much anymore. And, you know, to me, it's not surprising, though certainly I think it shows the way the world is changing, that Lu Wei, who's the head of the Chinese Internet Office, is part of the NetMoTNL initiative, coordinating committee, and not someone from Japan or any of the other leading Asians. I mean, if you know the way the coordinating committee is set up, he is the political representative not just for Asia, but for Africa and the Middle East. It's a big change. You can correct me, Mr. Pastor. As I said, we'll have some discussion. So, you know, I think there's clearly a need for a deeper partnership, and I think we recognized that early. There's been a rapid expansion of the U.S. ICT presence in Tokyo since over the past decade. Apple, Facebook, Twitter, Google, Amazon, eBay, those companies didn't exist when I arrived in Japan to work with Microsoft. And in Japan as well, there's been a rapid expansion. SoftBank, eMobile, Yahoo Japan, Mixi, Dana, Rakuten, they're all household names. And so, you know, very clearly, and we've heard it repeated, U.S. Japan leadership is important to preserving the openness, transparency, and diversity of the Internet in Asia. Question I'd like to raise, and I think it's important. You know, it's nice to talk about cooperation, but I think we really need to think clearly: what is the nature of that cooperation? What are the expectations that we're bringing to it? And the question is whether we are truly, U.S. and Japan, are up to the challenge. We need a regional, not unilateral or bilateral solutions. We talked about this as early as 2009 in a ACCJ Internet Economy white paper, raised some of the issues. I'm going to jump over this, but one of the key things that came out of that, the final chapter, was we called for the establishment of a U.S.-Japan bilateral Internet economy dialogue. And we centered that not in the trade policy mechanisms of the two countries, but in the State Department, the Federal Communications Commission, and on the Japanese side with the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. Because we were talking about partnership in building an Internet economy. And the question is how trade policy intersects with that. Dialogue started in November of 2010. We had a lot of issues on the table: privacy, spectrum allocation, digital content, cybersecurity, procurement standards, e-commerce. And we've met 6 times since then, most recently under Ambassador Sepulveda's leadership. And the private sector has actually played an active role in this. Very unusual to get the American Chamber of Commerce and Keidan Ren in the same room together, talking about the same thing. We've had recommendations for the governments on cloud computing, big data, barriers to cross-data flows, Internet of Things, and Internet governance. And I think certainly the dialogue itself has been a very, very useful tool and a spur to U.S.-Japan cooperation in most recently the ITU plenipotentiary meeting at the OECD and the WSIS process. And I also think it's supported a lot of greater private sector exchange on privacy issues, data localization, cloud security standards, disaster preparedness, and we're all working together on that big challenge called the 2020 Olympics. So what's our future agenda for the U.S. and Japan, but it's also an agenda for the region? I mean, clearly focusing on the ICANN transition, including a greater engagement with third countries, to remove obstacles to the free flow of data, building coalitions on shared values and principles of free markets, to challenge these demands and assertions of cyber sovereignty, avoid these risks of fragmentation that I touched on, move ahead, as Tsuchiya Sensei was talking about, with cybersecurity collaboration, exploring technology transfers, trying to get into a framework for that, sharing best practices, and continuing U.S.-Japan cooperation and promoting things like open data in areas like healthcare, education, energy, and managing the Internet of Things. This is where I think people are going to get a little interested, perhaps. I think getting privacy right is going to be a big test for us. Japan currently has a bill before the Diet where they're discussing revisions to their privacy law. It's passing in May. A new law will establish a data protection agency, set rules for use of anonymized data, define requirements for repurposing data, set parameters for input from the multi-stakeholder community, and reporting requirements for business in that context, and establish criteria for cross-border transfers. To date, quite frankly, there's been a lack of transparency and broad discussions on the ways in which this law is going to be implemented. The other thing, too, is that the U.S. simultaneously, I mean, the administration has come forward with proposals, it's developing its own approach on privacy. It's really important that the two countries consult closely on these two perspectives, and that we model in the region. And that's why I think we need a early meeting of the U.S. Japan Internet Economy Dialogue. We last met in September. I would argue we need one as early as May or June. And that we need to set up a privacy working group under this to meet periodically and share our respective practices. I don't think there's been, in that respect, adequate communication. I know that's going to get people upset. I also, I've traveled around over the past week or so, meeting with American businesses, talking about Japan and things like that. And what I heard was a lot of discussion and criticism of the approach that we're taking on net neutrality, and particularly the use of Article 2 to regulate the internet under a telecom framework. And they asked me what might be the impact in Japan. I mean, Japan doesn't have problems with net neutrality because they've solved the infrastructure problem, at least for now. And they also have problems putting enough content online. So they don't have a net neutrality problem. But the fact is, what if we had the Ministry of Communications assert authority to regulate the internet as a telecom service? I think we'd be pretty upset about that. And so the question is, practices and regulations that we develop in the U.S. context, we need to always consider how they impact us bilaterally, but also internationally. Finally, what do I do? I think that a lot of these discussions on the internet have pretty much centered on discussions among business and government. I think we need to involve the universities more, not just as individual scholars, but as institutions in the process and researching and developing recommendations. Association of Pacific Rim Universities recently launched an initiative to promote strengthened ties and more institutionalized consultation between government and the academia, think tank community, and businesses in the region. Keio University is taking a major role in that with support from corporations in the U.S., Japan, and Korea. We just had a very successful meeting in March. We're going to be proceeding on a number of different fronts. Basic goal is to link university research with the challenges of a growing internet economy in the region, and to build capacity in government and civil society on the challenges and issues surrounding the further development of the internet. Did I make it? 10 minutes? Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to ask one question and then turn it over to the audience for questions and comments. But one of the things that I want to talk about was what is building on something that Ambassador Marantis and Ed had pointed out with respect to small businesses and entrepreneurs in the global economy. Through the Global Innovation Forum at NFTC, one of the things that I've had the opportunity to do is get to know small businesses and startups who are global from day one, not just in the United States, but elsewhere around the world. You have these wonderful stories about someone either from a services company or e-commerce or business to business that puts up a website and has a couple of good media hits, and all of a sudden they have demand from 16 countries around the world that they're trying to fill. The suit that I'm wearing today is from a company up in New York called Black Lapel that in its first full year of operations exported to 72 countries around the world. And so these are wonderful stories of the digital age that really wouldn't have been possible even several years ago. Now, I know this has been a priority for the U.S. government. I suspect it's been a priority for the Japanese government as well. But I wonder if the three of you could talk a little bit about efforts to support small businesses as they go international, not just through trade agreements, as you spoke about a little bit before, but also through forums like APEC, which I'm a big fan of. And I know it gets derided as a talk shop, but I think thanks in large part to the good work of Ambassador Marantis back during the U.S. host year and since, it has been a really serious forum for incubating issues on the digital economy that then get translated into things like the TPP. But could you talk about forums and efforts where the U.S. and Japan could align to promote small businesses and startups accessing the global economy? Maybe I'd start with you.
Okay, well, I guess you could divide some of the digital work into categories like the TPP, where you're talking about rules, you're talking about heading off threats to the integrity of the internet, those sorts of things. And then you have educational and capacity building efforts. And those can be spread throughout the range of our forum. You could talk about APEC as an important one. We talk about the African Growth and Opportunity Act as a very important one we're working on toward renewal in the upcoming months. And what has struck me about it is AGOA, when it was created 15 years ago, was basically an effort to use U.S. tariff system to encourage large buyers to look at Africa as a source of goods. You can now think about ways to encourage small and local American businesses to make partnerships with African partners. Here in Washington, we have 70-odd Ethiopian restaurants. They are natural buyers of Ethiopian agriculture products if they can reach them on the internet, if they have a secure way of making payments, and if they can link up with Ethiopian Airlines, which has its daily flight to Addis Ababa every day. Those sorts of things are better done through discussion, through capacity building, through education than they are all the time, necessarily through rules and enforceable provisions of agreements. And I think your point about APEC is well taken, because those sorts of fora are very valuable for new entrants to trade who are trying to figure out how to do it, as opposed to very experienced people who want to be more, who have a problem that they want to get rid of or an aspiration that they want to achieve.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to introduce you to an example of social business in Japan. It's an unusual word for you, maybe, but social business is a very specific word in Japan. So they are trying to invent or create new market for small companies, actually. One example is that care for mothers of sick children. So some people have, some parents have a sick child because they have a genetic problem or other things. And usually mothers cannot work because they have to take care of their children. So it's a big social problem for us. So we want more women work in society, but it didn't work. So the government cannot fix this problem, and the market could not fix this problem. But young people using information technology create a new business to take care of these mothers. So they set up a new website and a very flexible contact system. So if mothers find help, mothers need help, so they can notify to the company, and this small company uses information technology to fix this problem and sends care workers to their homes or something like that. So these are new, very niche, very tiny market, but they are using information technology to make a new market. So these kind of things happening in Japan. We call it social business. So Keio University was very famous for producing so-called salarymen in Japanese society for big companies. But Shonan Fujisara campus I'm working for is famous for making new venture companies, because they usually don't want to work for a big company. So they want to start their own businesses. They want to make a new markets in the Japanese society. So these things is happening in the Japanese society using information technology. But their market size is very niche, so they are not big presence in the society. But it's starting gradually in the Japanese society. This is a very attractive move, I think.
Well, and Jim, you and I had been talking earlier about this. What Motohiro just described is kind of breaking the mold in Japanese society, right? And so, are there ways to incubate this or exchange best practices in ways that the U.S. and Japan can show leadership? I know Rakuten has been active in trying to support small businesses and entrepreneurs in Japan. There's DCamp in Korea. Are there platforms or opportunities to move this along on a global basis?
Well, I think You know, the most fundamental thing, and we had this conference about two weeks ago, and we brought in representatives from 17 internet research institutions around the Asia Pacific. And I threw this question out to them. I said, how can we really help small business? How can we really grow the internet in the region? And the answer we got almost from everyone is you got to build infrastructure. I mean, it's not just a question of, it's a fundamental question of access. And, you know, Japan has been really good at that. I think that if you look back, in 2005, Japan was probably in the top 5, if not the top 3 of internet countries in terms of the rankings in the World Economic Forum technology report that comes out every year. Now they've dropped below the top 20. And one of the reasons is they haven't solved this problem of utilization. A lot of it is government, a lot of it is business practices, a lot of it is personal attitudes. But I think the fact is Japan has done a very, very good job of building out its capacity. They really have the best infrastructure in the world, I believe. And they did it because the government played a large role in it. I don't think you can depend upon the private sector to build out the infrastructure for us. I think that's an example here with the capacity problems we have in the United States. So I think if the two governments can get together, use the ADB, I mean, this is a great chance to throw something back, maybe even have a aspect of cooperation with the Asian Infrastructure Bank that the Chinese are going. And let's focus on building out the infrastructure and capacity in the region. I think that'll do more for small business than anything else, I mean, in terms of incubation or a lot of these social programs. If people have the things at hand, they'll use it.
Are there questions from the audience? And if so, could you please identify yourself and ask a question there in the back?
Hi, Lem Bracken, Bloomberg BNA. Question for Ed Gresser, but I invite comments from the other panelists. Ed, do you have a message for U.S. lawmakers regarding any possible changes that might be needed for the implementation of TPP? You mentioned copyrights, maybe in other internet areas, and then it's such a fast-changing kind of sector. Do you anticipate that TPP itself would need to be changed in the future?
In terms of the message for Congress on these issues, I may direct you to Ambassador Froman's speech to the Center for American Progress last year called Trade Based on Values. I think it sets out the USTR's policy on these issues and hopes very clearly. In terms of changes to TPP, you must complete an agreement and have it ratified before you can aspire to improve it. And so I think our goal would be, let's include this at a high level in this year and work to implement it, and then at some point in the future, you can think about, you know, what are the next steps.
Other questions?
Thank you. My name is Li Yang. I think traditional value of both America and Japan, they are very good. They have a good sense of heroism, really patriotic. Not like currently they say patriotic as a label. So I just wonder now, before FBI would say encrypt the data would be help to protect your privacy, but now they hate encrypt because this is kind of obstruction of FBI's misconduct. So I just wonder if you can, Japan and America can really lead the issues, how to protect real privacy, how to promote the people's voice, because currently they use hacking to obstruct the people's voice or their communication. Like every spin is successful, but in the United States, the kind of Occupy Wall Street cannot go anywhere. They cannot even have a microphone like this. So I just wonder if you can really help hack the FBI problem. You know, a lot of small businesses, they are really contractors or subcontractors with the FBI, with CIA. I think we have to do the right things right rather than just promote small businesses.
So, ma'am, thank you very much for your question. You brought up a really important point, and it's one that Myriad had touched upon, as well as Motohiro. So I wonder if maybe I could just add to that a little bit and say, you know, you had talked about China's cybersecurity policies, and so a lot of what we've been talking about this morning has been working through trade agreements where you have like-minded countries. that are, it's a wonderful vehicle to align policies among those like-minded countries. But what about the Chinas of the world? What about the Brazils of the world that might not be part of these negotiations? What levers exist for the United States and Japan on issues like cybersecurity, which you just brought up, to enable access to the global digital economy?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Actually, 14 years ago, I came to Washington, D.C. to research on encryption policy. So at that time, it was the age of Clinton administration. Clinton administration had an encryption export regulation. So they didn't want to export stronger encryption technology, encryption software to other countries, including Japan. So only United States can use the stronger, powerful encryption. But so other countries are not allowed to use the advanced technology at that time. But it was a silly, foolish regulation because everyone could download that software from the internet. But so still the US government said, no, other foreign people should not use the stronger encryption. But it didn't work. So Vice President Al Gore said, no more. So we abolished that regulation. But after that, so actually many people are not using encryption software even today. So how many of you are using PGP or other personal encryption software in your machines? Yeah, very few. I'm using PGP, so we call it a GPG now. So if you use the encryption software for personal communication, so you will be the usual suspects actually. So NSA or FBI might follow you. So that's a stupid situation. I hope U.S., Japan, other governments can develop a better software for encryption. But the point is that convenience. Why people don't want to use encryption technology? Because it's not convenient enough. It's very annoying to use software in your computers. So you have to update your software very frequently, and you have to keep your private key in your machines. So if you lose your private key, you will lose everything. So these kind of things is very annoying for ordinary users. But I think we have to develop, Japan, US companies must develop new, convenient, and secure encryption technology. So this will change the internet economy, digital economy in the future. So it will be more safer, much safer, and it will be more privacy-oriented internet will come. I'm afraid intelligence agencies don't like that idea, but so it's for us, it's for our nation, so we should develop that kind of software.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I think that, again, another thing that came out of our conference, we raised exactly this question. And, I think some of the computer scientists just said, if we had to do it all over again, we would have built a better internet. I mean, we're really stuck with what came out of universities instead of what is dealing now with the kind of world in which we're dealing with, particularly the national security requirements. I think one of the most interesting developments is that we don't have a robust dialogue among our alliance partners in Asia on cybersecurity issues. So there's tremendous communication between the U.S. and Europe through the vehicle of NATO. But in terms of our bilateral alliances, only recently has Japan put in place a framework that will allow us to really have a robust dialogue. And that dialogue somehow or other has to include Korea as well. I think it's paradoxical that China has convened a meeting on cybersecurity between Japan and Korea in itself, but we have yet to do so, and I would strongly recommend that we start moving in that direction. As difficult as it might be, we need to sit down and talk about these issues because our economies are incredibly vulnerable, as I think my colleague, Professor Tsuchiya, illustrated.
So Ed, what about these policy levers to influence the behavior of nations that are not part of our trade agreements, like the Chinas and the Brazils of the world? How can the U.S. and Japan cooperate to secure an open internet in places outside of the TPP?
Unfortunately, I have to say the most useful and effective thing we can do now is to conclude the TPP. That if there is demonstrated in these negotiations a common set of views, a workable set of policies that the U.S. and Japan join into as two of the really advanced internet users, if those are policies and principles that Vietnam and Malaysia and Peru view as valuable to them, that's a very powerful signal. I think that is, in these next few months or this year, the most important thing.
Other comments or questions?
Ken Dillon, Ciencia Press. This is for Professor Tsuchiya. I was very taken by your characterization of the ants and the rats in China. And I would interpret your meaning to be that that's actually a problem for Japan and the United States more than it is a problem for China itself. If you are thinking of them becoming hackers or people full of anger, destructive in one way or another, independent of the People's Liberation Army's branch for doing cyber attacks, that they would be a kind of population of angry hackers who would be attacking around the world, causing a lot of disruption. And how do you see a solution coming for this? Should we try to reach out to them and somehow enlist them to help us keep the internet in shape, or should we talk with the Chinese government? What solution do you see?
Thank you so much for your question. So it's a difficult question, of course. People tend to say that Chinese Communist Party is controlling everything inside China, but it's not true in cyberspace. So there are many types of hackers in Chinese society. So one is patriotic hackers. So they are doing for their own fun, actually. So they don't have any specific goal. They try to be very political, but sometimes they are doing just killing time. But second is economic hackers. They want to try to steal valuable information, and they want to make profits from that. And third is PLA. So, but I think PLA is not operating a lot. They are trying to hide their real capabilities, prepare for the future war. So they are not so active, actually. But the fourth is intelligence agencies. So China has spy agencies. So they are very active. They are trying to steal political or military information from other countries, including United States and Japan. But in that case, so President Xi Jinping cannot control everyone inside China. But he might control PLA, he might control intelligence agencies, but he cannot control economic hackers or patriotic hackers. That's their problem. And sometimes there are cyber mercenary soldiers. They are hired for profit. So they are unhired, so jobless young people inside China. So they get money instead of hacking somebody else. So that black market exists in Europe, Russia, or other countries too. So this is their problem. And fixing this problem is almost hopeless. But now in Japan, so we established a cyber defense unit inside the self-defense force. So the number is very small, less than 100 actually. But we are trying to educate and hire very talented white hat hacker for our military, our self-defense force. And it's happening in the United States too, I believe. So we have to educate those people, and we should not let them go to the dark side. So we are always saying that you have to protect our nation, and you have to be patriotic. So it's difficult, but some young people are very patriotic in the Japanese society now. So if you are a talented geek, so you can go to the private market or black market, you can raise a lot of money, you can be rich. But still, sometimes some people want to work for the government. So that's a good sign for us. So we want to educate, and we want to let them get rewards for their work, not by money, but something, reputation or peer review or something like that. So we want to develop better framework for white hat hackers in Japan. This is a big policy task under the Japanese government now, under the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of METI, so Economy, Trade and Industry, or MIC. So we are very eager to hire very good, talented people to protect us from bad guys.
Thank you. I thought I saw one more question in the back over there.
Hello, I'm a student in American University doing Washington semester program. I heard that to Professor Motohiro that freedom of flow of information is very important. There has been some cases like collateral freedom. How effective is collateral freedom as a tool to open up the internet freedom in places like China?
Sorry, I didn't understand. Collateral freedom?
Yeah. So collateral freedom is a term that I learned when I went to Freedom House. It's when foreign businesses work in China and they open up an information that's against Chinese law, but Chinese law cannot stop them from releasing those information because these companies have such a large role in Chinese economy. For example, like Amazon, they have released the firewall. There was a thing like that. There's a website like that where they open up an information that's against Chinese law. And through this, the freedom of internet is kind of broken down.
So people say it's a Chinese Great Firewall. So Cyber Great Firewall is very strong and controlling Chinese people's internet use. Actually, it's not so powerful. For example, I have many Chinese students studying our university, our graduate school, and they have their own Twitter account and Facebook account before coming to Japan. And they are still using these American social media inside China, and the number is growing, and every day, actually. So there are many ways to avoid Chinese government's regulation. Of course, the government is not so foolish, so they are trying to fix those security holes. So it's a kind of competition between the government and internet users. But still, Chinese users are enjoying their freedom to use the internet. For example, so if you use the term of very famous religious group, so your tweet will be deleted from the Chinese Twitter site Weibo. But they are still using another term to represent that religious group. So these kind of things are happening. So you cannot directly criticize Chinese leaders, but you can imply your criticism. So these kind of things happening every day in Chinese market, Chinese cyberspace. And I think some people say, so China is restricted very much, so they are losing internet freedom. But still, Chinese people want some freedom to use these information technologies for future. So I think it will be better gradually, step by step in the future. So President Xi Jinping needs support from the young people. So he's fighting with the corruption for the elder people. So elder Chinese people don't like him anymore. So young people needs better future, and Xi Jinping is trying to get support from the young people. So these things will change the cyberspace in the future in China. I believe. I'm not sure. I might be wrong, but I'm believing so.
So, did you have a question, or you? Okay, sure. I thought you were going to tell me it was time to go.
Oh, no, I'm enjoying this conversation too much. Jim said that he was going to make some comments that are going to generate a lot of discussion. So I want to go back to an observation he made about Japan's privacy law, the one that's being considered. And he made the comment that there was not enough transparency and that there could be some concerns. And I know that some in the American business community, when they looked at the privacy law, raised some concerns. But I wonder why this concern, and if in fact things can work out themselves, and that we don't perhaps need full convergence in domestic regulatory frameworks to have a robust international cooperation. Because from what I understand, and I'm not an expert on privacy law, but looking at the outline, there are three mechanisms by which personal information can be transferred to parties outside Japan. One is to get the consent of the people involved. One is to certify the countries having a similar regulatory regime. And the third one is if the company, say an American company, follows equivalent practices to Japanese companies, then this should be allowed. Wouldn't that third element in particular reassure American companies that they don't have to be worried if Japan does go ahead with this privacy law in its current format?
Yeah. Problem is, quite frankly, as always, and I've had a long experience in negotiating with Japan. It's what you see on paper often is very, very different than the way it's implemented in practice. And I think that we haven't had a lot of transparency or engagement by the government with the business community or quite frankly, the broader public on this particular issue. Now we're going to go ahead and establish a data protection authority. And the question is how much transparency and input are we going to have into the process by which they actually develop these implementing regulations? You can interpret each of those categories that you talked about in terms of consent, in terms of a third-party certification, in terms of the government doing an adequacy finding with respect to third countries in a very positive way, but also be negative. And as a point of fact, the Data Protection Authority is going to have only 250 people assigned to it. It's likely that over the next 3 years, they'll probably only be able to hire 40%. Probably the overwhelming majority of them are going to be on 1 to 2 year delegated billets from other agencies. So the question is, where is the expertise going to come from to do adequacy findings with respect to 150 countries around the world? Right now we have 121 countries around the world that have developed privacy frameworks. And so, and on what basis is this going to be done? Is Japan going to actually rule against Brazil, or are they actually going to rule against Vietnam? So there's going to be, there's really a lot of questions. And that's why I think, as I've mentioned, I'd like to see the U.S. Japan Internet Economy Dialogue. I'd like to have a meeting. We're not turning this into a bilateral issue, and certainly not into a trade policy issue, because we have a lot of, developmental and other sort of concerns here in the United States into how we handle privacy. It's not simply an enforcement issue. There's definitional and all other kinds of questions. But let's get the dialogue. But that's why we launched it 4 or 5 years ago. And in that particular process, then I do think we called on this as the American Chamber of Commerce last September for the creation of a privacy working group, a small working group of people below the radar, but just exchanging and trying to get a little bit more transparency, a little bit more interaction between ourselves and the Japanese side. Why? Because exactly as Ed was saying, this is incredibly important for the rest of the region. And frankly, I think we're seeing, both because of the administrative structure of the Japanese government, which is basically a civil law. The Data Protection Authority is not an independent regulatory authority. It's being located as an Article III organization within the Cabinet Office, so its independence is really questionable. So the administrative issues are there, the administrative culture, but also, for the Japanese companies are not really active on the internet domestically. They're beginning to have a broader presence in Asia. So privacy for them is not part of their business model, as it is for companies like Google and Facebook and others. And so one of their main concerns is that as they're trying to sell into the EU or countries that are influenced by the EU privacy framework, that they can have an adequacy finding from the Article 29 working group. And so a lot of their development of this privacy law, particularly the huge changes that took place between June of last year when the original privacy framework was introduced, and we actually spoke about it quite favorably because there was a multi-stakeholder process, there was a lot of transparency, it was based on market principles, it talked about sharing data. And what came out of the process from the Cabinet Office in late December and now has been pushed into the diet for a variety of reasons that are too complex to explain here, what we're going to end up with. And I think and the fact is the law is going to pass, it's not going to be amended. But the fact is that the actual process of building the law is going to take place over the next couple of years. I think we want to be part of that process. And, there is and I think Demetrios referenced it, a very, very different approach to privacy and more broadly internet governance between ourselves and the EU. And it's very, very important that our economies, along with Japan, get aligned because the model is up for grabs in Asia. I'll just stop there.
I think from the U.S. business perspective, one of the things that we worry about is these rules being too prescriptive in a way that, for example, in the EU, permits an adequacy finding of a country like Argentina and not of the United States. Is a focus on outcomes and stepping back and thinking about the idea that you're the United States and Japan just like you're the United States and Europe. There's no way that you can't transfer data between the two countries, and what you have to do is come up with frameworks and bridges that enable that to happen, including for small businesses and startups who are most likely to get wrong-footed by these different rules.
And so just having that adequacy finding provision in the law, I mean, they assure us, well, it's not going to be a problem. But it is in there, which means there's going to be a process. And then, as you said, what happens when one country is declared one way and one country is declared the other? And where is the capacity in Japan to do that? I mean, I'm sure the U.S. can go through that kind of a process around the world. That's the reason we say, let's focus on outcomes.
So having overstepped my bounds as moderator, I think I'm going to end it there. And please join me in thanking our panelists today.